Good afternoon. My name is Paul Hunt. When I'm not doing administration, I'm a physical chemist professor here at MSU. I serve as the Senior Associate Vice President for Research and Graduate Studies in Dr. Shu's office. And I want to talk a little bit today about something that a few of you will have experienced already if you have been in an employment situation where you ran your own group for research or creative activity. But most of you will be coming for the first time to being sort of the leader of people who are junior to yourself. And those junior people might variously include postdoctoral associates, graduate students, undergraduates, and in a few cases, minors who are not yet undergraduates. And there are substantial institutional policies which MSU depends upon each of us when we do that to pay attention to and ensure compliance. And I'm going to do an overview of some of those. Colleagues will talk in more detail about a few of them that are sort of the mainstream ones. But basically, anything that happens in your group, you're responsible for. Now, I'm running a project at the moment that is coming to an end tomorrow that was an 8-week off-campus research internship for rising high school seniors. Those folks are minors. We have been getting parental permission slips at the drop of a hat. We can't move them from place A to place B without getting a permission slip. But we had to put everyone who was involved in that through training on how to deal with minors, and moreover, all of the faculty who were involved in the program had to go through supplemental criminal background checks under a university policy that protects minors. That's one example. Something that my colleagues and I are responsible for, Rhett Butler's back there in the blue shirt, is that we administer the university drone policy. Now that may affect 6 people in this room, and so I'm not going to dwell on it, but the university really cares about drones. We care about them here on campus. We care about them at extension sites around the state. We had a case quite recently where one of our faculty members from the College of Social Science was going to operate a drone for land use studies in Malawi. And we have to worry about complying with international law concerning the drones as well as the drones here. Another example of something, if you do it, you own it, you're responsible for it. What's on the slide here is export control and trade sanction. And it's something that can affect folks in all areas. If you are tempted to say, well, that applies to science and engineering, not to me, you have a surprise coming. And I'd rather have you be surprised today and not get in trouble than not have you get surprised and find that life is less good than it was. The U.S. government controls the overseas transmission and the disclosure in the United States of export-controlled technologies under 2 sets of circumstances. There are actually more than 2, but 2 that are the big ones. One is the so-called international trafficking in arms regulation. We have lots of people on this campus who do research funded by the Department of Defense, DARPA, ONR, AFRL, ARO, and so forth. And some of that research involves sensitive technologies which cannot be disclosed to people who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents. More broadly and more commonly, we have many faculty who conduct research which either uses or impinges on the advancement of so-called dual-use technologies. That's technology that has a civilian application, but it either also has a military application or an ability to be misused for terrorist or civil rights oppression purposes. And the U.S. government has similar restrictions on it. The difference being that in the case of the dual-use technology, there is an incredibly complicated set of tables that tell you what citizenship technology recipients are permissible or impermissible. And just to give you an idea of this, there are some things that you can disclose to someone from the People's Republic of China that you cannot disclose to somebody from Canada. There are some things you can disclose to people from Canada that you cannot disclose to a person from Colombia. And there are some things that you can disclose to a person from Colombia that you cannot disclose to the first person from China. So that this is not an easy proposition. There is a huge, vitally important safe harbor that protects us and protects every other scholar, starting at Harvard and Stanford and Berkeley, Caltech, and working down. And that is the so-called fundamental research exclusion. The US government excludes from the coverage of both the ITAR, arms, and EAR, dual use regulatory regimes, technology outside of encryption, which is the one carve-out that's a problem no matter what. But as long as we're not talking about encryption, it excludes those technologies from restriction and therefore protects not only you, who we take to be smart and capable of defending yourself, but also that first-year graduate student in your laboratory who probably doesn't know much about these kinds of things. As long as two conditions are met. Condition number one is that there is no acceptance by us, which means by you, as well as the university, of publication restrictions. So anybody who says to you, how about taking my money and there's just one thing, we won't let you publish without our approval, you should be hearing big-time alarm bells. Is it possible to do that at MSU? Yes. Is it a good idea? That requires some fairly serious thought by you and by your chairperson and by your dean, because when you can't publish, it impedes your ability to get promotion or tenure. When your students can't publish, it impedes their ability to get their dissertation or thesis done. But beyond those academic outcomes, there's also the loss of the fundamental research exclusion safe harbor. The second condition is there may not be restrictions on the citizenship of project participants. And so if we see a contract or a grant come into the university that says you have to get our permission if you use anyone who's not a citizen or permanent resident, that also rings the alarm bells. So if you want to worry the least amount about the bureaucratic niceties of export control, please preserve your ability to publish freely and do not accept restrictions on the citizenship. Now, people get in trouble because there are certain organizations in the world that the US government, in its role as Santa Claus, puts on the naughty list. And in the case that's up there, Massachusetts at Lowell shipped to an organization in Pakistan a certain spectrometer. The organization in Pakistan was on the entity list, and UMass Lowell got fined and sort of publicly humiliated for doing that. Steve mentioned the fact that a lot of what we're talking about applies in the humanities and social sciences and the creative arts as well, and that's nowhere more true than in the case of trade sanctions. Trade sanctions, unlike the export control regulations, are administered by the Treasury Department, and I have some examples up there. Anyone, regardless of what discipline you're in, if you go to the MSU Dubai outfit, you're going to be a couple blocks away from a bank owned by the government of Iran. And if you process a visa transaction in that bank, the US government's going to come knocking on our door and we'll all be really unhappy. Okay, so that Bank Melli is an example of an organization that's on the entity list. The Alumni Association, and more recently, out of the College of Music, the professors of jazz, and still more recently, two of our physicists from EFRIB we're talking about going to various conferences in Cuba. There's a sort of cultural exchange aspect with the Alumni Association, a musicology application in the case of the professors of jazz, and a physics conference in the case of the FRIB faculty. There are strict rules that permit one to go to Cuba, but you have to stay within them. The reason I use the word permit there is that the statutory law of the United States prohibits travel from Cuba, but there are licenses that allow scholars for the purpose of research or professional conferences to go, and we need to know that. I mentioned AID researchers in Myanmar or Burma. I'll use one more example to sort of underscore the applicability in the arts. My graduate roommate one year was a 4th to 7th century Byzantine hagiographer. He's a historian who did the history of the lives of the saints in Byzantine. Now, about 300 years after the period that Bob studied, icons started to show up in the area of Kiev. So let's hypothesize a research visit to the Ukraine to see how the icons had changed over the period of time from the lives of the saints to their depiction in the icons. The problem here is that there's not one, but two sets of rules if you travel on academic purpose in the case of the Ukraine. One set of rules for places like Kiev, and an entirely different set of rules for the Crimean. And the US government can, in principle, charge people with felonies if they don't follow those rules. Now, all of this seems bureaucratic, and it is, and it's not self-imposed bureaucracy, it's bureaucracy imposed by the Congress of the United States. But when Steve said that we're here to help, we are. Our job is to keep you and your postdocs and your grad students and your undergrads and potentially minors out of trouble on all this stuff. So although I said that was a duty that each of us has as a faculty member with regard to our own group, and it is, we are here to help. And I'll close with the following thought, the big red button. I have had the privilege to be an administrator at MSU since 1985. I've seen lots of people's careers tank during that period, all the way up to deans and one vice president who just plain got fired. No one, however, while I've been an administrator, has ever, to my knowledge, been fired for asking for help. It's always the reverse. It's the people who don't ask who get themselves in trouble. So whether you ask your chairperson or your research associate dean or your dean's office or anybody in Dr. Shu's office, and you know, I'm in the phone book. You can call me at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night and I'll talk to you if you've got an export control issue. Please ask us. When in doubt, ask, and I wish you the very best of luck in your career, and I'm glad to welcome you as a colleague.